pay deal 3 years ago, they don't have to pay us now. That's ignoring the 10 years of austerity they forced on us. The pay freezes, the cuts.
Hello, and welcome to NHS Workers Say No and Nurses United Mythbusters Q&A in regards to the NHS pay issue. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Mel Kerr, who's the East Midlands organiser. I'd like to welcome Matt Tacey, who's a mental health nurse and who is also from the East Midlands. I'd like to welcome Nina Barbosa, who's governance manager and Birmingham and Black County organiser. Now, this year has been the year from hell for NHS workers. We have gone above and beyond what has been asked of us, working amidst deadly pandemic. Stress, burnout, and anxiety, feelings that have been felt by all in the NHS family. The public supported us, clapped for carers, started as a genuine movement, only to be hijacked by ministers seeking only a photo opportunity. And now, given the opportunity for them to show how the government values the NHS and their workers, they've now thrown our hard work into the ground and crushed it with their heel. 1% is what we've been offered. And for a Band 5 nurse, this equates to about the equivalent of a cup of coffee a week. For others, it's much, much less. NHS Workers Say No are campaigning for a 15% restorative pay uplift for all NHS workers. And today, we're not here to try and persuade you why NHS workers should get that uplift, but we are here to equip you, the people on the ground, with the answers for those tricky questions that might be asked by people who are potentially skeptical or even opposed to the NHS pay argument. And this way, when you come away from that conversation, you will be able to come out on top with the argument for a fair pay deal coming out on top. Yeah. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Mel just to open up with some questions. I think we've got some pre-prepared questions. Also, if you have a question, if you're watching on Twitter, Facebook, or Facebook, you can submit your questions live, and there's someone monitoring them, and you can use hashtag Mythbusters or hashtag NHSPay15, and hopefully we'll try and get to answering your question. So without further ado, Mel.
Lovely, thank you, Alex. And yes, we're live streaming on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at the moment. So we're just keeping an eye on the questions coming in, but we do have a couple of pre-event questions that have come in. So just to start off with the first one, really, which I think will open up a good conversation. Do NHS workers deserve a pay rise? So if anybody wants to start off with that as a question, and we'll open the floor to the people on the panel.
Yeah, I'd quite like to start off with this one. I think it's a really good thing to ask where, the country would be if we didn't have the NHS, if we were without the NHS. How would the pandemic have actually played out? And also, you've also got to look at the vaccine rollout success as well, and how effective or efficient that would have been without a coordinated and united front of the NHS rolling it out. And I think it's also pointing out that it's not just us who deserves, sort of a pay rise. We've got to show solidarity with other public sector workers. And I think it's, good to make a point of that no one should work more than full time to earn, a full-time wage, to earn a living, to live life, and this includes, teachers, supermarket workers, and police officers deserving that as well. I think you've got to be careful not to get dragged into, all of our heroic actions and stuff. I think the public, know this. And I think the sort of person asking, saying you don't deserve a pay rise is probably going to be someone who's, sceptical or malignantly opposed to it anyway. Nina, do you have something to say?
Yes, so I just wanted to sort of reiterate that point that you made about people should be paid reasonable wages. We have a huge issue in this country that a lot of people aren't paid wages that they can live off. So you have people who are in working poverty, and the NHS includes an awful lot of people who are in that category. Ultimately, if people are working full time, they should be getting paid enough to live off, even at lower bandings. So it's really important that we keep in mind that we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We're the 6th richest country in the world, and we have an awful lot of money in this country that is not going into the workforce of the country. We need to have a look at redistributing that. It's really important that people are getting paid wages that they can actually live off, so that you don't need benefits if you're on lower banded jobs in the NHS.
Yeah, and excuse me, sorry, that's a good start, isn't it? But going back to the first question, absolutely we deserve a pay rise. You know, we've said this time and time again, we've lost 20%. That's a fifth of our pay in 10 years. We've got a staffing crisis in the NHS. We've got more staff leaving than we do joining. You know, that increases waiting times. That does affect patient safety. It affects, you know, treatment and prognosis and diagnosis. So I absolutely, you know, truly believe that we deserve a pay rise. I agree with what the other panelists have said in terms of other public sector workers as well. And it just feels really quite unfair that, I'm sure this may come up about the affordability of a pay rise, but it just seems really unfair that a lot of the workers are being punished and with pay freezes and pay cuts because of the government's poor handling of the pandemic. You know, the public sector workers were the ones that got us through the pandemic, you know, going out day in, day out. And a part of me felt as though there'd be a little bit of compassion from this government potentially because of the pandemic and what we've had to risk, you know, in terms of our health, our family's health. A part of me was a little bit hopeful that would be recognised. But for the government to turn around and say 1% is all we can afford, I've described it as criminal before. It is criminal. It's just, it proves really that all of the collapse and stuff were just platitudes, weren't they? They were empty gestures. So I genuinely do believe that too right, we deserve a pay rise, and we're fighting for it, and we're going to win it. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I love the enthusiasm there. And actually, again, I won't repeat what all the panelists have said, but actually, I think somebody made a really good comment in the chat about actually people calling us NHS heroes. Heroes is not a term that I really take lightly, and it certainly isn't something that I really associate myself with. This is my job at the end of the day. I'm here to care for my patients and to make sure they are safe, to make sure that my colleagues and my staff are safe. And at the moment, I can't guarantee that because of what this government has done, not only to the system, but to the staff that work within it. So I would agree with everything that is being said. There's also been a comment in the chat about they think we earn 34,000 a year, and this is why people won't get behind it. Is there anything that anybody wants to come back on that?
Yeah, I've when I heard this by this sort of statement or stat from Nadine Dorries on her sort of government the morning sort of rounds in the media, I was really perplexed because I could not find where this stat comes from. And actually, I've looked into it. It comes from an NHS digital document, and it includes all NHS staff. So this includes doctors and consultants, and it gets a full-time equivalent average. So actually, you know, you can poo-poo that statistic because that's not a true reflection of, you know, your Agenda for Change staff, which is the staff that we're campaigning for a pay rise, because doctors and consultants get paid on a different pay scale. And the reality is a starting band 5 nurse. You know, I'm a nurse, so that's my background. Obviously, as a physio and occupational therapist, starting occupational therapist, for example, earns about £25,000 starting, roughly. So that's sort of a comment you can say. You know, that's taking into account lots of different jobs, and we know that Matt sort of skimmed it earlier. You know, we are significantly worse off compared to 10 years ago. I think the recent sort of statistics are up to 32% in some cases on some bands. worse off. So, you know, we 15% is not a number plucked out from the air. We're trying to restore the pay that we've lost over the past 10 years.
Yeah, there's a few questions about where's this figure come from, and I somebody may definitely know the answer, but I think what they've done is they've added all of the nursing staff from band 5 up to band 9. They've added all of the pay that they've received, and then they've divided it by the number of nurses, and that's why it's got to 34k. But we know, nearly half of all nurses are band 5s, and you can be a band 5 for 20 years, but your pay will never go above 30 grand. So that's I think that's where that figure has come from. It's not particularly helpful, and I believe Nadine Dorries and there's other MPs that chuck these figures out, but don't give much context to how these figures how they've got to those figures. So in a way, they're sort of bending stats to meet their own agenda, and again, that's extremely frustrating for the likes of us. Somebody that's got 25 years nursing experience and then being told, oh, by the way, you're earning 34k. Absolutely not. I think it's really unfair.
I think as well as acknowledging that the vast majority of nursing staff and Agenda for Change staff aren't earning that amount of money, we also need to question why it is that figure is only 34 grand, given that it includes some of the highest salaries in the NHS. You would expect that, given this includes some of the salaries that are in the triple figure thousands, that the average should be actually much, much higher. So it's really a reflection of how poor the pay scales are for the vast majority of people, that the average number is coming out at such a low number when you consider the very high paid, possibly overpaid people who are at the upper end of the pay scales.
You're muted now.
Thank you. You think I've learned that. I think it's also really important to look at how, because statistically, if you look at the actual statistics and the facts, yes, I'm sure the average pay probably is about 34,000, but obviously we also need to look at and understand the demographic of the workforce and understand how many are in each band and what the true reflection is in terms of the numbers on the floor. So I think what's important is we need to understand that this government are using statistics to their advantage, and we need to equally use statistics to our advantage to paint the true reflection of what's going on out on the front line as we know it right now. And it's really key that we have those statistics fresh to mind, so that when you're having conversations out with staff or the public or friends or colleagues, whoever it might be, that actually they may come with, well, the average pay of a nurse is 33,000. Okay, but we also equally have the majority, I think it's above 50% of nurses that are band 5, and actually at band 5 you don't even hit 33,000. The top of band 5 is 30,000. So we're not. It's more education, I think. But the government are always going to use statistics to try and fight their battles. And I believe that we need to do exactly the same thing. We've had some questions in the chat as well, and I'll bring one up. Healthcare is a vocation, so why don't we just get another job if we're not happy with our current level of pay? What do we have to say to that?
Well, I think that healthcare professionals are, and they are professionals. Let's not skirt around this subject. Healthcare professionals, nurses, occupational therapists, physios, get a degree level qualification these days, and they are the lowest paid graduate. We're the lowest paid graduate workers, and we need to be paid for the professional job that we do. I think there's a perception that, particularly nurses, are no more of a doctor's handmaiden, when actually nurses in particular, and actually physios and other band 5 jobs do way above what they did, 10, 20 years ago. So I think it's important to bring that up. Also, in terms of getting the higher level of education, we come out in tens of thousands of pounds worth of student debt, some cases in the hundreds. And if you sort of match that with the salary, it just doesn't sit really. And I think you need to pay the workforce for their skill set that they're providing. And you've got to look at the context of the pandemic. Where would we be without the skill set of the NHS workers that sort of got us through that?
Yeah, I think just sorry, Nina, go on.
I was also, sorry, just briefly going to say, where would we also be if all healthcare workers stopped being healthcare workers? We need care to be provided. I mean, we have to be realistic here. This is an essential function. This is not a function that we can do without in our society, and it has to be delivered some way. We either deliver it through a means like the NHS, which has been proven time and time again to be far more cost effective than private sector provision, or we have to go for private sector provision, which is going to cost us all far more and is going to result in a massively fragmented health service. One of the only reasons why we haven't buckled as a country under COVID is because the NHS has been able to do coordinated responses on a number of things. Look at the success of our vaccine rollout compared to other countries, and it's because we have a unified, coordinated NHS, which has admittedly been sold off in chunks and fragmented. It's not what it once was, but it could be much worse.
Yeah. You pretty much covered what I was going to say. So thank you. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Lovely, thank you. We've had a question in one of the live chats from an Amjad Stati. Apologies if I've pronounced that incorrectly. My names are not my strong point. There is a lot of information from unions stating different figures. Why can't the unions tackle the pay issues together and not separately, as it makes the staff's case weaker? I'd just like to come in that quickly myself. I don't think it's a case of it makes it weaker. I think the aim and the target of all the unions, whilst they may have slightly different asks in terms of the actual number, so whether it's 2,000, 12.5, whatever it may be, they all have exactly the same aim, which is to achieve patient safety through a significant and meaningful pay rise, whatever that number may be. And I understand the point, and I agree with the point that the unions should be working together, but I think they are working together to the correct extent. And I think the important factor here is to remember that unions are membership led, and actually it's the members' responsibility to make sure that they are pushing back at their unions to make sure that they are representing them fully. And if you're not happy with something that your union is doing, please do get in contact with your local branch executives, your regional officers, whoever it may be, to share your thoughts and to be active. And we also need to make sure that our contact details are up to date as well, so that if any unions do decide to do a consultative ballot or even a ballot in terms of industrial or strike action, then we can be sure that we respond to the extent that we need to get that action on board. So that's my point of view on that. Does anybody else want to come in?
It's just, I was probably guilty. Sorry, there's a bit of an echo. I was probably guilty, up until about a year ago, I wasn't particularly active within my union. And there wasn't really a particular reason. I think my impression of unions were they're there in case you're in trouble. They're there to support you through disciplinary action, that sort of thing. But I've learned so much more over the past year. And what I would do is attend your next branch meeting. I mean, I've met some fantastic, really like-minded people with the same values and beliefs. And the unions do listen. I do feel listened to in my branch meetings. I raise concerns and they do address them and they feed back to you as to what they've done. And they're my union in particular is very keen to hear from our members. And in my local area, there's over 700 members of the RCN. That's who I'm with. But the turnout to monthly branch meetings is probably 15 people. And it's trying to find out why people have difficulties engaging with their union. What's the barriers? And we don't know, and we'd love to hear from members to understand what it is. So I might just attend a branch meeting. It's good fun.
I'd just like to take this moment to say that if you haven't already, you can follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. There's on Nurses United, there's the Get Active form, which helps you sort of get active, so to say. Also, just a quick reminder that in terms of looking ahead to the future for unions taking industrial action, make sure that your details are up to date with your union so that when you get balloted, you can vote. And that's what's really important, because if there's not enough votes, because of the law at the moment, I think 50% of the membership has to vote, and 40% of that 50% has to vote for yes for industrial action. So it's really important you keep your details up to date and get involved with us, and follow us on Facebook, and get involved locally as well. Look at whether there's a local group where you are. Sorry, Mel.
No, thank you. I was just going to bring in the next question, actually, because I think we've touched on it slightly in our answers anyway, but we are getting it through on the live chat as well. So what about the private sector? What about those who have lost their jobs during the pandemic? Do you really think that we should be asking for a pay rise when people are losing their jobs?
I think it's very much a political choice not to increase public sector pay. It doesn't need to be one or the other. And also there's another sort of part to this question, and people will say, what about the people who don't have jobs? But actually, that is not, why are we being attacked for that? Why are we being attacked for campaigning for our pay? Looking after the public sector jobs, looking after the unemployed, and giving people substantial public sector substantial pay rise can be synonymous. It doesn't have to be one or the other, or robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I think the argument that there isn't enough money to increase public sector pay is rubbish. Like Nina said, we're the 6th richest country in the world. But I wouldn't disagree with you in terms of the fact that other public sector pay should be coming with us. And actually, if NHS workers were to achieve a substantial pay rise, the public sector other public sectors are only ever going to sort of equalize with us. They're not going to stay down. They're going to mobilize and encourage and energize other union movements to try and match the pay. So I would say, we would encourage other unions and sectors to follow by our example, and we're not part of this race to the bottom. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on that.
I think the other important thing to bear in mind with this is that if we get a substantial restorative pay rise, we'll be in a position to start spending money in our communities again, and this will help us actually with the economic recovery. There are jobs that are at risk at the moment that might be salvageable if people have actually got the money to buy those goods and use those services. At the moment, many of us who work in the NHS struggle, and even those who don't struggle don't have much money spare. If we were in a position where we were getting paid a salary that was comparable to what we were paid 10 years ago, we'd be able to get money flowing back into our communities, and that would save a lot of jobs. The reality is that this pay rise wouldn't actually cost the government much, because they'd get a lot of money back in taxes, and there would be huge benefits for the wider economy as well. We need to be thinking about this as part of a system, and NHS workers are not an isolated chunk of this society. We're part of this society, and we're part of our communities.
Yes, and just coming on from what Nina said, first, can I just correct myself? I think 50% of union members need to vote, and 40% of the total union members need to vote for industrial action. So that's my apologies. So I'll just correct that. And coming off what Nina said, there is evidence, about the economic argument. There's an NHS union study done by the London Economics Consultancy. And basically, the cost of a 15% pay rise for all NHS staff would be smaller than the entire agency and bank bill for the NHS. Now, I know that agency and bank suits some people, and I'm not suggesting that you get rid of that entirely, but that can be reduced down a lot, by offering a more attractive salary to NHS staff and permanent staff members. And the argument there's not enough money to pay for this pay rise is absolutely rubbish, to be honest. You've only got to look at the government misuse of money. 37 billion for track and trace, 128 million for a festival of Brexit, which just doesn't need to happen. 2.6 million for doing up the media room at Number 9. There's plenty of examples of misuse of our money, taxpayers' money. So I think the economic argument is almost one of the easiest hard questions to answer. And like Nina said, more more money in the pockets of NHS workers, it's only going to stimulate the economy. This study showed that with a 15% pay rise, the economy would be boosted by 1.3 billion. So, that's sort of evidence. So have a look at that study. It's a really good report by the London Economics Consultancy.
Yeah, you forgot to mention Priti Patel's 70 grand eyebrows as well. I just wanted to get that in there. A couple of points I did want to make is probably the same study Alex was talking about. The London Economics did a study that was commissioned by unions that said a pay rise of 10% would, 81% of that money would return to the economy. Another point I want to make is we have 45,000 nursing vacant. We have over 100 in the NHS. Increasing pay creates further jobs. It makes it more attractive. So the people that have been furloughed, I mean, I'm not saying that healthcare isn't for everybody, but it will create jobs as well.
You're absolutely right. I think there's a lack of, with this government's handling of NHS pay, there's a sort of a short-term snap decision rather than a long-term vision. We've really got to bolster the NHS workforce to tackle future crises, so that we're not put on the back foot again. And it starts with a restorative pay uplift, a substantial restorative pay uplift.
Lovely, thank you. So someone's just asked on the Facebook chat if we can have a link of that study, please. So if Alex, you do have a link of the study, it'd be great if you could pop it in the live chat. That'd be amazing. Just had an interesting question from Trish, I believe it was Trish Hines. There's not a strong history of nurses taking industrial action. Can we be optimistic that this will change significantly enough for a meaningful ballot to take place? I know we've discussed strike action and industrial action briefly. What I will say, coming back on that, there is actually quite a strong history, especially in the recent times. We had a very successful strike in Northern Ireland recently with the Royal College of Nursing. The Northern Ireland members went on strike very effectively and actually managed to achieve pay parity. So that was really successful strike. There was also some strike action that went on in Guernsey as well, slightly out of the UK, the sector that we're thinking of, but they also went on strike and again had a very successful strike themselves. So actually, I understand the point, and yes, it can be quite difficult to achieve industrial action, but actually it's more through ensuring that members ballot and they send back their ballots. That is the biggest difficulty that all unions face. So which is why we keep pressing the point. Please make sure your details, specifically your postal addresses, are up to date, because for a ballot to be legally accepted, it needs to be through a physical postal ballot. So make sure that your details are up to date. But does anybody else want to comment on that, really?
Yeah, just on sort of where other sectors have been successful with asking for a substantial pay rise. HMRC, although albeit it was a pay deal over 3 years, have been awarded 13% pay rises. We've seen the healthcare workers in France receive an €8 billion pay deal. Mel mentioned Northern Ireland bringing a pay parity with England, the Guernsey pay rise of 5% as well, and New Zealand nurses being given 12.5% in 2018. So there are success stories out there, so it can be done, and I think it's important reminding yourself of that, because one of the arguments is it's just unrealistic, but it can be done because there are examples of it being successful. Yeah, and can I just very quickly, the RCN as well, they've committed to the most ever money towards a strike fund as well. So that's clearly that the RCN, the unions, are taking this extremely seriously. They are listening to our voices, but they're listening to public opinion as well. The public do support us. So, the RCN committing to 35 mil. Is it 35 or 36 mil? Yeah, 35. For me, that's the government have said, right, we can only afford 1%. The RCN has said, well, the gloves are off now. We'll commit to £35 million and we'll train activists to be able to be active, to get the word out and ensure that we fight for as long as we can, really.
Yeah, 100%, Matt. Yeah, 35 million, really, really significant announcement for the Royal College of Nursing. And I know that we received a lot of positive feedback from that. And actually, you're absolutely right. That's us showing as the nursing profession, the healthcare profession, that we are absolutely serious when this government puts our patient safety at risk. And if they want to go down this path, this direction, we absolutely will challenge it. And to be honest, that takes me on to the next question, really. So this was one that was submitted prior to this event. Won't our patients suffer if we take action?
I feel really strongly about this point, because a lot of people say, you can't go on strike or because it puts patients at risk. But if we don't do anything, we continue to put our patients at risk. We're 45 nurses short. That's like I've mentioned earlier. It does increase waiting times, and just to reassure people, if there was industrial action to occur, there's policies and procedures in place to ensure that patients care is not going to stop all of a sudden. Some services will. People that are having surgery, and then the surgeon's not going to walk out and say, right, I'm on strike. So there are procedures in place. There's a lot of safety planning just to ensure that it is safely done.
Yeah, and I think sorry, Nina, go on.
No, you go, Alex. Sorry.
I was just going to say, if there's any sort of public sector group that would, and do industrial action safely, it's going to be the healthcare professionals that have been looking after, working really hard during the COVID pandemic. That's all I was going to say. Sorry, Nina.
No, there's also plenty of evidence that we can do this safely. Patients didn't die when the trainee doctors went on strike a few years ago. Patients didn't die in Northern Ireland. We know how to plan these things so it's safe. And of course, certain key areas like A&Es and intensive care are not going to be going on strike. The rest of the workforce are going to have the effect for them. We will plan this safely. Of course, it will be inconvenient for people, but the reality is that patients are suffering hugely at the moment. The staffing losses that we have are causing huge problems with how we run our services, and patients suffer as a result of that, sometimes significantly. And we're due to lose a lot more staff in the coming years because a huge amount of our workforce is basically eligible for retirement in the next few years. We've not been retaining staff for years, and this is why we've got this massive imbalance. We recruit, that's not a problem, but people don't stay working for the NHS because it's gruelingly hard work, because there aren't enough people to do the work. So we really need to look at this differently. And just to shed, I suppose, light on that specifically, I know a number of people who were working in the COVID vaccination centres, and all of them said what a pleasure it was to work in those environments because they were properly staffed. The protocols, the procedures, everything was so easy. It was the way that work should be, not the constant fighting that we have on a day-to-day basis. We need to get back to a place where we can actually look after our patients without constantly struggling every day. Then we can provide proper care again.
And yeah, just to add what Nina was saying, to compound that sort of, I think Matt was telling me the other day, 1/3 of nurses are due to be coming up to retirement in 5 years, which is really quite a staggering statistic. We've got the RCN did a survey last year in 2020. Sort of looking at, and they found that about 1/3 of nurses were considering leaving the job, leaving the profession. And actually 61% of those who said they were considering leaving, cited pay as a main factor. So, when you've got Helen Watley saying it's not just about, no one mentions pay when she sort of does an online forum with nurses, absolute rubbish. The survey shows that. And actually, I think, I can't remember who did the survey, but they were 100,000 NHS staff were thinking of leaving. I'll try and get the source for that. But yeah, I think that's what I saw.
Lovely, thank you. And actually, we've just had a comment pop up saying about who and how is this planned safely. And also, Vicky made a good comment as well about would we be disciplined if we were to go on industrial or strike action. I think it's really, really clear, and I won't go into details now purely because of time, but there is a certain process that industrial or strike action entails, and there is certain employee responsibilities and equally certain employer responsibilities, and that means your managers, your matrons, your department leads. There is specific processes that are followed to ensure that not only our staff are safe, but also that our patients are 100% safe. And obviously certain actions, industrial action won't necessarily impact on certain emergency and critical care services such as A&E, ITUs, theatres, dialysis units, maternity wings, places like that. They will ensure that all of the emergency and critical care services still continue during any episode of industrial or strike action, and that's why it's so important for employers and unions to have a good, direct, open channel of communication to make sure that we can plan effectively for this. But what we do have to remember is that our dispute is not with our employer, i.e. the NHS. Our dispute here is with the government, and that's what we need to remember. We're not here to make our employers' jobs difficult. We're here to fight for patient safety, and I think it's really, really key that that is what we need to remember, and that is why we are here. So just to go on to a bit of a slightly different direction now then, can we afford a pay rise with the current state of our economy?
So yeah, I think we sort of touched on this with the London Economics report. You know, there is enough money to go around. You only have to look at you know, the misuse of taxpayers' money on certain things, like Matt said about Priti Patel's eyebrows. And I think, you know, you've got to look at the long-term vision rather than the short-term. You know, if you were to give a substantial pay rise to staff, you know, you're going to sort of cut agency costs in the future. You're going to retain staff. You're going to reduce stress and burnout, and therefore sickness. You know, so there is definitely an economic argument for this. And you know, you've also got to think about wealth distributions as well. You know, Britain's billionaires have seen their fortunes soar by about 25 billion during the coronavirus lockdown. You know, there could be, you know, the government need to be sort of creative. They could put a windfall tax on companies profiteering from the pandemic and the lockdown. You know, the government has the money, and also it's really important to sort of stress that the government and Bank of England relationship as a lender and a loaner of money is not your typical lender relationship. The government can pay the Bank of England back at whatever rate it wants because it's the country that the Bank of England works in. And also because of the economic times, the interest rates are going to be really low. So actually, you know, if we borrow more money, we're borrowing loads of money anyway. And, you know, again, what Nina said about being the sixth richest country in the world, and also the London Economic Study. So, you know, we're going to more money in the pockets of NHS workers will stimulate the economy. It will, you know, it will stimulate what we need to kickstart the economy again. So, yes. You know, and we're going to claw a lot of that back in tax and national insurance as well.
Yeah. If hear me out. If I went to Primark and I bought myself a pair of jeans, and I can see everybody cringing there, so I don't know what I'm going to say. I bought myself a pair of jeans and I came home and there's a hole in the crotch. I'd take it back, wouldn't I, and demand a refund? Why aren't we doing that with track and trace? We've paid £37 billion for track and trace, which has been an absolute shambles. When my wife was positive for COVID, 6 days after testing positive, she got a text saying, "Oh, your isolation period's over." Only because we're both nurses, we know that that's not right. So we contacted them and said, "Oh, there's been a fault in the system." How many other people have actually left the house after only 6 days isolating? This is when it was 10 days, I think it was. So why aren't we going back and saying, "Hey, Serco, Deloitte, where's our refund? This ain't working. £37 billion. We could probably pay 15% pay rise could be for over 3 or 4 years." Why isn't Matt Hancock banging on their door? That's what I would do if I was a health secretary. So, you know, there's money there being spent and wasted, and we need to go back and demand a refund, because it's our taxpayers' money that's paid, and absolutely useless.
The government have just decided that we're going to increase our nuclear warhead capacity by 40%. Clearly, there's enough money for that. That's going to cost far more than what we're asking for. It will cost far more than a 15% pay rise for all public sector workers. We need to be realistic. There's plenty of money in this country. It's just not where it belongs. It's being concentrated in the hands of a small number of people, and they can never spend it the way that the people could actually spend it in our communities, making vibrant places and wonderful places where we could live.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, just to summarise the points that we've been making, really, is that this is a political choice. There is absolutely the money in the pot, but it is this government's political choice to choose to put patient safety first above all else. And that, in our eyes, is a very, very simple choice to make sure that the people of this country are safe. Everybody in this country will access healthcare at some point in their lives. We need to make sure that the system is safe and staffed for people to be able to access that healthcare as and when they need it. On a slightly different note now, we've got, I think, a question that we could probably all very easily relate to. I know I certainly can. But we had a question that came in saying, we are too exhausted to fight this campaign. Why should we do this? There are a lot of staff who are suffering with exhaustion and fatigue, mental health problems during this pandemic, and they will do so for many, many months, probably even years to come. So how can we justify and how can we encourage those colleagues to join us in the fight for fair pay?
I think I could definitely relate to being exhausted. I think, that it's quite widespread, the exhaustion. NHS workers have pretty much worked flat out from March 20, a year ago. But I think what's important to say is to define activism. So, activism is a very broad church. So it doesn't have to be standing on the picket line and, making speeches and shouting through a megaphone. Yes, that is activism, and that's on one end of the scale. But also, it's as small as wearing a badge, taking a selfie, putting it on social media, starting the conversation, having a chat about it. That is activism as well. And it's those tiny little bits that sort of keep on chunking away, and eventually it makes an impact. And I think if someone is just so exhausted and they say no, I don't want to do anything, I think the most important thing is make sure they join a union, they keep the union their details up to date, and when the time comes, they vote for industrial action, and when they're balloted. And potentially from a different angle, you could say, yes, campaigning is for the long haul. It's not going to be a simple thing. It's not going to be done next week. But I think if you're feeling this way now, as exhausted as you do now, think about how you're going to have to reach retirement age. Think about how you're going to feel then, and are you going to want to get to that point without being properly paid for the work that you do? I think maybe you just need to sort of provoke some thought around that. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything.
If I could jump in, I suppose, for a moment. One of the things we need to bear in mind is that every single right that we have as workers has been fought for by people taking industrial action. We don't have a 5-day working week because people decided that they were going to give their workers 5-day working week. We don't have statutory annual leave or sick pay because some kind, generous bosses decided to give them that. The reality is that if we as workers don't stand up for ourselves and unite and have this battle, then things are not going to get better. And for many of us, our working situations are barely tolerable at the moment. And for many of us, we're suffering from huge amounts of mental distress and anxiety because of the conditions that we have to work under. We need to do something about it. That doesn't mean that we all need to be charging up and down the street and rioting. We can do small things because there are many of us, but we all need to do small things together. And that way, when one of us is tired, that's okay. You can take a back step because you know that other people can keep pushing things forward. This is going to be a long, hard slog, but between us, we have to find the energy. The other thing that I'd say is that it can give you energy. I was out earlier this evening handing out leaflets and badges and talking to people about the campaign, and it was really uplifting. It was really uplifting for all of us that went out to do it. We had some great conversations with people. It can be a good way of getting a morale boost. I'm not saying that everyone needs to go and do the, boots on the ground kinds of activity, but just getting a little bit involved, being part of this, it's good for you as well. So I would encourage people to get involved. But just remember, the only times that we've ever won any rights, whether they be workers' rights or civil rights, it's been through mass action. We need to take it. People aren't going to give it to us.
Yeah, and I think, talking with, like Nina said, talking with like-minded people who are just as passionate can help you feel energized. Because I know sometimes I feel like I'm the only one that cares, but actually there are other people that care and who are just as passionate. And I think, talking to them and, even coming to events like this reminds you that you're not the only one, and it makes you come away and feeling hopeful and energized. So yeah, I would definitely resonate with them, yeah.
There's something very, very powerful about sharing your experiences. Not all good experiences. They're difficult experiences as well. I'm a psychiatric nurse, but my background, and I have found this sort of campaign. It does. Nina mentioned about you get more energy from it, and you do, because I speak to I would consider them friends. I speak to them every single day from all over the country about difficult experiences, and it's developed into a friendship. We're all activists. We're all campaigning, but it develops into friendships as well. So it's. I can accept that we are exhausted. How fantastic would it be come the end of the summer that we've achieved history by making 15%? We can look at our grandchildren, look at our children and say, Daddy was part of that. How amazing would that be? I'm getting a bit emotional now. I do apologise.
So Matt, you're allowed to get emotional. At the end of the day, this is something that's really close to our hearts. So it's really important that we do show exactly where our passion lies. And actually, I think each other's passions helps us to keep going, doesn't it? I think. I did have a nice question earlier. Let me just find it. How do we feel about the other countries being offered pay rises? So obviously Scotland have been offered this 4%. How do we feel about that? What do we think's going on in terms of politics there?
Yeah, I think what you said now, I think it's important to note that in the UK all the governments are devolved, so they all make their own decisions in regards to how much they pay their healthcare workers, and yes, potentially this could be considered as a bit of political spending. So I think Scotland have got have put it up to 4%, and that's put it. The thing is, other devolved governments increasing their NHS workers' pay does put pressure on the other governments to step up. And I know in Boris Johnson is facing a lot of pressure to sort of address the pay issue from his backbenchers. I know Wales have given a £735 one-off payment, which equates to £500 after tax, and Scotland gave a £500 sort of bonus to their pay workers. I think in terms of the NHS workers' pay campaign, we all have a united front of asking for 15%, and I think that if one devolved government or a country were to achieve a substantial pay rise, the others would need to take action. I don't think it's healthy or it's quite politically inept for one devolved government to not increase substantially their NHS pay when the other devolved governments are, because I think politically it would be quite a bad move. What does everyone else think?
So for me, I think this is just a really cynical thing. It's very similar to me as the UK government, the English government offering NHS workers a 1% pay rise and all other public sector workers none. The reality is we're a national health service. We should be getting paid a reasonable comparative rate across the country. I know there's some differences in cost of living and there's some adjustments to be made for that, but actually we need to have one pay rise for the whole of the NHS. And I'm going to keep pushing for 15%, but it does need to be substantial. And we need to have unity in this. Carving off chunks and saying to the Scottish workers, well, you can have 4%, and then using that as a bit of a bargaining chip to try and get 6% for the English workers and maybe 7% for the Welsh workers. I think this is ridiculous. We are one country and we need to be fighting for one pay rise together as a unity. And we need to be reaching out in solidarity to other public sector workers and helping them with their pay campaigns. I know that a number of other unions are starting and seriously launching pay campaigns of their own to represent their workforce. We really need to be looking at this as a country. We can afford to do far, far better, and we can live far better than we are at the moment.
Lovely, thank you. I've got one final question from Gary before we try and draw this to a close, because I'm very aware that it's quite late in the evening. I don't want to eat into anybody's evenings too much longer, but I think it's been a really, really good, active conversation so far. So thank you to everybody who's commented on the live chats. So one question from Gary here. So say the government offers us 7%. Do you think we should take it, or do we give up the fight? He's all for fighting all the way, but I know many nurses that would take the 7%. And actually, I feel very, very strongly that 7% isn't 15% or 12.5% or anything that any of the unions are asking for right now. What we need to remember is that any of the asks that the union's going for, 12.5% Royal College of Nursing's ask is 100% researched, evidenced and fully funded. It is something that it absolutely works towards a restorative pay rise for our safety critical workforce. 15%, again, there is evidence to show that that is a very achievable number when this government choose to make that political move and to put patient safety first. So, yeah, I can understand why staff would say 7%. Yeah, it's not too bad. I'm sorry, we have had a significant pay cut over the last decade. What we are asking for isn't a pay rise. It's not a pay award. It is a pay restorative pay for the cuts we have seen. That is what we are asking for, and that is what we will demand. We're not here to say we want a financial pat on the back. We want something that is going to recognise the skill and the knowledge and the responsibilities that we face on a daily basis, which is only ever increasing. And only in the short 5-year career I've had, my responsibilities and skills have only increased. And we find a lot of nursing workforce are on par with our doctors and our medics out in the world of the NHS, and also in the independent and private sector as well. But what we also need to remember is the cuts we have seen, and we need to recognise the impact that this is going to have. I keep saying it, on patient safety. If we don't recognise and act on this now, all we will see is further staff leaving the NHS, leaving the healthcare system entirely to go and find a job that will pay better, or will pay the bills, or is less stressful, or less risk to our lives, less health risk. Because at the end of the day, we need to be paid for what we do. And I don't think that at the moment we currently are given a truly reflective pay for that. So I'll shut up now, but I'll pass it over to the panel for any response to that.
I suppose if I very quickly give 2 pennies worth, based on that London economics report that several of the other panelists referred to earlier, we now have figures that indicate that some NHS staff have lost as much as 32% of their pay over the last 10 years. So bearing in mind that the figures for how much pay you've lost, of course, depend on where you are on the agenda for change pay scales, but it ranges from between 15% to 32%. Asking for 15% is really being quite reasonable, to say the least. We should probably be asking for a lot more. We typically quote the figure that we've lost 20% of our pay over time. I know for me, I've been in the NHS for a long time, that is true. So 15% is not asking for a lot compared to what we have lost, and it would restore the dignity of NHS workers, which would do a huge amount of difference. 7% is nowhere near enough. And we have to keep telling each other that and reminding each other that. Just because it seems like a nice number, and it's nicer than 1%, it is nowhere near enough.
Yeah, and for me, if we don't fight, if we just say, oh, 70, yeah, we'll accept that. Why, because we can achieve the 12.5 of RCN and 15%, but we won't know unless we do stand up, show solidarity and fight, and it's patient care. If my colleague was only administering half the meds my patient, oh, hey, what are you doing? That's impacting patient safety. Pay is impacting patient safety. So why aren't we saying, hey, Boris, Matt Hancock, well, 7% is far off union demand, and it's your actions are putting our patients at risk. That is something we won't stand for. That is absolutely not.
Absolutely, and I think coming back to some of the previous successes, HMRC got 13%. New Zealand nurses got 12.5%. There are plenty of success stories, and I think it's really important to keep the motivation, to keep active. And what's really important is that you keep your union details up to date, so that when you are asked about a pay rise or a pay deal, you can vote on it. And that when the time comes, if it's not enough, you vote for industrial action.
Yeah, and I think we also need to remember that actually we've proven in the past exactly how much power we have as a profession and as a body of people when we get together and we fight for our patient safety. In the 80s, nursing won the 34% pay rise. 34%. We're asking for less than half of that. So I think it is perfectly achievable. And somebody in the chat, Gary, I think it was, said that's the game we'll play. 2 people can play that game. We are 100% up for remaining in a challenging position and to stand up for not only our rights, because this is obviously, we have staff who are on food banks, who can't afford to pay the bills. I know I work a lot of extra bank shifts just to make sure that everything gets paid every single month. But there are a lot of my colleagues and friends who are in much worse positions than I am. So that, if you want to look at it as a game, that's fine. There's 2 sides to that, and we are very ready and willing to play that game for the fight for fair pay. I'll just ask the panelists to have a final comment before we close off, and we've got a video to play that Alex, I'll leave you to introduce if that's all right. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's been involved tonight. We've had some amazing questions come through. It's been really great to see the engagement that we've got. I've also seen asks for a fact sheet to have if we're having persuasive conversations. That's absolutely something we can work on based on some of the answers we've given tonight, and we can circulate that through our social media. So keep an eye out for that. We will work on that, no problem. But thank you all tonight. Really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I've really enjoyed it. It's been it's been a really interesting debate. In terms of a closing statement, I want to make it as inspiring and as positive as possible. But for me, what resonates with me over the past year is that we've lost colleagues. We may know somebody directly or indirectly. We know that there's hundreds, potentially even up to 1,000 healthcare workers that we have lost, and for them to lose their lives doing their job, and then for the government to say, oh, by the way, I know we acknowledge you've lost your life, but 1%, for me that hurts. It does, it does upset me, and I try to use. I have thoughts like that, and I use it to empower myself. And when I'm feeling a bit down and a bit tired, I think, no, I'm going to stand up for my colleague. We have lost some in our trust, and say, no, I'm standing up for them. It's not good enough. So sorry, it's a little bit negative. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody. And get active, get organised.
I guess I'll just reiterate that point about get active and get organised. If you're not in the union, seriously think about joining one. It is through the collective power that we really have power. Individually, we don't. If you are in a union, try and get a bit more active in it and get involved in the pay campaign. We together can make this change. We can get a restorative pay rise for the NHS, and we can show that actually it's possible to redistribute the money in our society so that we start feeling like we're one of the richest countries in the world, rather than most of the countries grumping and saving. In Birmingham, where I live, a third of children grow up in poverty. That's absolutely obscene and ridiculous. And we're about to have some of the most hideous job losses because the retail sector provided so many jobs for young people, and that's just been absolutely obliterated. We need to look at how we help this country get out of this mess. This is the time. We need to start paying our public sector workers properly so that we can support the rest of our communities. So please get involved. We can do this.
Absolutely, Nina. And yeah, I just want to echo that sentiment, really. I think definitely, get active. It is energizing. Every time I come away from one of these meetings or one of these, meetings with my local group, I feel energized. And, sort of also want to reiterate, join a union, because if you want to take part of industrial action and vote for industrial action, you need to be part of a union. So make sure you do that. And also I just want to say it is energizing, and it doesn't have to be, running one of these sessions and talking to the camera. It can be wearing your badge, posting on social media, whatever your strength is, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, or whatever your platform is, get involved, get those conversations going. And I think also to say about the pay issue, the public is on our side. That's half the battle. And it's important knowing that, that the public are behind us on this. And you have your colleagues on your side. You've got lots of other people, lots of people on the chat that you can network with and talk about that. And to end this Q&A, the Bristol group sort of made this video back in November with the help of a UE film student called Scott Knight. And he directed this video, and it's all about the NHS pay campaign. So we'll end on that, and it's will bring a tear to your eye. So from everybody, from Matt Tacey, from Mel Kerr, and Nina Barbosa, and Alex Old, and me, I just want to wish you a very good evening, and keep on campaigning for NHS Pay 15, and I hope you enjoy the video. Good evening.
Pandemic, lockdown, furlough. For us, it was different. To work we must go. Fear, loss, pain, distress. There's thousands of staff with mental health to address. We have been used like pawns on a board, slapped in the face by politicians ignored, scrutinised by those watching from above. Protect the NHS, yet they didn't protect us. Heroes don't wear capes. Politicians told us lies on our screen to show us them clapping, while another essential worker dies. Nationalised healthcare, built for us all, deceived to dismantle. Now watch the NHS fall. So here, take my hand. You don't have to do this alone. To my NHS family, me and the public have your back. Hand in hand, we will walk together until your mental health is back on track. We can never understand completely the predicament you're in. Yes, you deserve a pay rise. We are all rooting for you to win. Here's to the public, all that food that kept us fed. Your claps and rainbows spurred us on. Tears of joy for some tears from fear. Regardless of our feelings, it was nice to hear those cheers. With claps and passion, knowledge and cheer, you just want compassion for your sacrifices and tears. To the NHS heroes, we remain right by your side. Ahead are brighter tomorrows. Our love for you is nationwide. The NHS has proved a lifeline for many. So support our 15% pay rise for a general strike.
We are ready.